it's you like the last time George Norrie was talking about Roswell and George Knapp was talking about Roswell. I think George Norrie had George Knapp on as a guest, and they were talking about Roswell, and they were saying, "Man, isn't it a shame? Somebody out there has to know what happened at Roswell. Somebody out there." And I call in, and I said, "I know exactly what's going on at Roswell," and I get ignored. I can tell you exactly what happened at Roswell because one of my best friends in life was there.
Oh, cool. Could you do it in a minute so I can hear it?
Sure. All right.
Okay. Is that okay, Valdez? I'd love to hear this story.
Of course, of course.
and I'll tell you, nobody's heard this outside of my close friends because nobody will listen. But what happened at Roswell was of course, you had the Greys, right? And the Greys are really the automaton stooges of the Orion reptilians. That's who the Greys work with. And
that's correct.
And it's the Greys that go around and pick up the human bodies and do the abductions and all that kind of stuff. And the U.S. government claims they had made a treaty with the Greys that they would trade technology for letting them pick up certain bodies and pick up humans, do their DNA experiments, and then return them safely where they picked them up at, erase the time factor so they returned exactly the same time that they were abducted, and their memories would be erased. So everything was fine and dandy and until the Roswell crash occurred. Well, it turns out the Greys that were in the Roswell crash are from Zeta Reticuli. They're from anybody that doesn't know, Zeta Reticuli is a binary star system which can only be seen from the southern hemisphere, and the Greys that crashed in Roswell were from the third or fourth planet. I don't remember now. It was either the third or fourth planet from the sun of Zeta Reticuli 2. That's where they were from. And when the crash occurred, what happened was there was a number of Greys on board, but the real problem was there was a whole bunch of human body parts. They had taken humans and cut them up and were doing all sorts of really nasty things with humans, and that's what really caused the problem there. Well, what happened was after the crash, there was 3 Greys that survived the crash, and 2 of the 3 that were still alive were injured and only lived a short period of time after the crash. The 3rd Grey, who was affectionately known as E.B., survived unhurt whatsoever. All right, so he survived. So the next thing you know, all their stuff is collected, and the Greys are hauled off, all the body parts and everything. You know the story. They're all hauled off, and they're taken to this hangar. And you have the CIA on scene, and my friend worked for the CIA, and she was right there in the hangar. And that's how I happen to know all this stuff. She was right there in the hangar along with the generals and all the other big wheels from the Air Force. And they had E.B., and they were trying to interview E.B. And they started asking questions to E.B. and said, "What are you doing? Where are you from?" and all this sort of stuff. And they immediately recognized that E.B. was telepathic. E.B. did not communicate the way normal humans do. His communication was telepathic primarily, and the CIA and the Air Force generals were having a real problem because they were trying to ask E.B. questions, and they were trying to think out the questions ahead of time. So they'd have a conference outside the room where E.B. was sitting in a chair behind, being in the interview room, and they would be in the next room trying to come up with questions to ask him, and they go in, and once they figured out the questions, they go in the room and start asking EB what the questions were, and it turns out that EB was a pathological liar. They could not get anything out of him that was true, and that what made things really, really bad was the fact that EB knew what the questions were before they even went in the room, because he was telepathic. So so what the Air Force decided was, well, we have to find some way of blocking his communications, and so they dreamed up. They made a very special Faraday cage to put him in that actually succeeded in blocking his telepathic communication with anyone outside this special cage that they put him in. And then they were able to surprise him with questions, and they started getting some of the truth out of him. Well, anyway, so that's how they found out that he was from Zeta Reticula 2 and that sort of thing. Now there's Greys from other parts of the universe, but that's just happened where EB happened to be from. Now what's interesting is EB was a very unique organism that was designed to be able to handle the stresses of outer space, cosmic radiation, and all these sort of things. So he had a very special body, and he had a body when that basically they would soak their bodies in some sort of like blood of dead animals or whatever, but they didn't have an ordinary digestive system. They had a digestive system that was a chlorophyll-based digestive system. And because they had this chlorophyll-based digestive system, they exuded their waste products from their digestive system through their skin exactly the way a plant operates, just like a green plant. And so as they would do that, the excrement that went through their skin was very putrid and very toxic and smelled very bad. Plus, they were also very, very sensitive to airborne diseases. And that's why the Greys have been known to wear these real tight-fitting suits that were made out of material that could not even be cut by knives and scissors and fabric cutters. That was a very special, very high-tech suit that these Greys would wear when they were operating in space. Well, anyway, so they kind of put EB on the back burner. They just keep him around, and then after about 3 years in captivity, EB became sick and became very ill, and they brought in medical doctors trying to diagnose what his problem was, but they couldn't figure it out because there wasn't any doctor in the world, or not in the Soviet Union, China, India, Great Britain, or the United States, that knew how to do anything with this guy because of him being sick and having a chlorophyll-based digestive system. So what they wound up doing was they thought, well, since he has a chlorophyll-based digestive system, we need to call on some people that are specialists in plant life. And so they had a meeting, and they called in a meeting, and they found that there were 3 top-notch plant specialists, and the one they ultimately picked was, and I won't give his name for his own family protection, but I met him in the early 90s. I was introduced to him, and he told me the whole story of what he did. He was a professor emeritus in the early 90s. He was a professor emeritus at the University of Minnesota at Minneapolis. And he was called in, and he was a specialist in plant diseases, and he was also worked for the War Department and developing ways of killing crops on the enemy. So he he knew what it would take to kill plants, and he knew what it would take to keep plants alive, and he was called in as a specialist to try to save Evie. And I know that firsthand because I talked to him in an interview for over 2 hours with two of my other friends that were involved with all this. So anyway, this professor did everything in his power to try to save Evie, but found out that there was nothing that he could do, and eventually Evie died, and they put him on ice, and the rest is history. Now, what's interesting about that, it was right after that they talked about the Martians are coming and the green Martians. Well, that whole term about green aliens all came from Evie because he was a chlorophyll-based entity like a plant, and that's why the Martians are green. That's where they're coming from. That's where that came from. And then when they did that movie, War of the Worlds, where with Gene Barry and the aliens came in and they did everything. The military couldn't do anything against them, and they fought them, and all of a sudden they started dropping out of the sky. Remember that movie? And then the bottom line was, there's nothing we can do against the military, but it says Earth provides its own defense system by providing viruses and bugs that'll get into them and cause them to die just from the bugs living on the planet. So there's connecting the dots for you.
Well, that's very interesting that you said all that, and thank you so much for telling me. There is a couple of questions I have about your story, and please don't take this the wrong way, but I didn't believe that the CIA was actually around in 47. I think that was the Office of Naval Intelligence that you're talking about, or the OSS.
Yeah, it's exactly right. My friend was OSS. Spent all her time in Germany, became part of the Luftwaffe, infiltrated the Luftwaffe, flew everything that the Germans said, and as a matter of fact, became a flight instructor for the German Luftwaffe, spoke German fluently, and in 1943 the Germans had reverse engineered some craft that was intentionally crashed into the mountains near Peenemünde, and the Germans reverse engineered those spacecraft, and they were flying all these Foo Fighters, and then by the late 43, they were building a 125-foot diameter craft. They were going to the moon and all sorts of places, and my friend was told that she was going to be one of the top flight instructors, instructing the new generation of Luftwaffe pilots how to operate the 125-foot diameter craft that they were building as a super weapon, and it had howitzers and bomb racks and everything else. It would have been a super weapon. Could go, thousands of miles an hour and all that. And she was told in the early 43 that she would become a flight instructor, but then considering the way the war went, the Germans decided to cancel the program. They loaded all their UFO technology on their 9 supersized submarines and took them down to New Schwabenland and Antarctica, and that's where they finished building the craft. But anyway, so my friend, and by the way, she said as of 2010, just 9 years ago, the population of New Schwabenland was over 2 million. Pretty big
that's
population.
Interesting. They've got to be underground if they're there, though. See,
they are.
That's the issue.
They are.
Yeah.
Primarily.
Yeah.
Yep. But anyway, so my friend that was with OSS just automatically became part of the CIA. When that was formed, that was all formed together about the same time the Air Force and all that came together, and she just transferred over into that. Since she was a pilot and all that, she became part of all that. So that's her history,
wow.
And she was on site.
That's an amazing story, and it rings so true with me. I've interviewed a lot of people about a lot of things like this, and I'm just now. Have you written a book about your friend's experience and your what you know about all this, and the professor emeritus at the college, at the university. Have you written anything about this? Have you got it all on paper somewhere?
No, I don't have anything that's on paper. It's all word of mouth,
okay.
and only maybe half a dozen of my friends even know about it. And
okay.
It's and this is what I've been trying to share on Coast to Coast, but they don't want to hear that. But maybe you can share it with them. If are you going to that UFO conference at the end of May out there in the desert?
Am I going to the circus? Yes, I'm going to the circus.
Well, you can share the story with George Norrie and George Knapp and tell them Bob said hello and they're not interested, but here's the story. Here's what happened.
Well,
Say it for
yeah,
me, will you?
I'd be happy to, but what I'm going to tell Tom is I'm going to say, Tommy, I'll let him on. I said, and this is how I'm going to phrase it, and please don't take offense. I'm going to say, even for pure entertainment value, he's got a lot to say. And see, if you play these guys, and I love Tommy dearly, don't get me wrong, but they've got to, it's their job to entertain people, and that's what everybody forgets. And so at least if I can bring some value to that part of their equation, then, they might even have you on. I don't know. But, I'll talk to Tommy and we'll see what we can do. But, I'm not promising anything.
Well, I have really no desire to be on the show. I just wanted to put in my 2 cents worth because they keep complaining. Nobody ever tells them what goes on. And I just wanted to share what I just told you. That's all I wanted to say. I don't want to go on and say a whole bunch of other stuff.
Yeah. Well, if you just told them that, I think they'd be happy. They'd probably have you in open lines and tell that part of it in 5 or 10 minutes. I think they'd be happy to do that. But, it's a difficult game for them because I think, knowing George and Tommy, I think they really want to know what's going on. But I think because they've got the network to deal with, they've got all these restrictions. I mean, they've got to appear legit, or they don't have a job. And, it's a tough place to be. And I feel sorry for them in a weird way because, they're the biggest thing going, but, it's got to be the toughest job out there because who do you listen to and who do you not listen to, in the UFO community?
You remember Art Bell, right? When he used to take guest callers on, he had no screeners.
I know. But, things have really changed since the beginning of the whole UFO thing. And you got to remember, Bob Bigelow was funding Art the first 5 years or 4, something like that, first few years anyhow. And Bob was looking for information, and he was letting the no screener thing happen, and everybody was spilling their guts because Bob was looking for answers, and he would get a hold of those people because, they're keeping their phone numbers, their record of everybody called in, who they were, and what their story was, and what their phone number was. And I can guarantee you, now that I know what the whole situation was at the time, those people that he thought were telling him some truth that he was looking for were getting a phone call after that show the next day. And getting, asked if they would come and be interviewed by somebody. Because at that time in the early 90s, they were looking for some answers. And I think by that time, they were looking for more of the psychic connection DNA answers. Or they wouldn't have put Kit Green and Gary Nolan and all those guys out there taking blood samples from contactees and their EEGs about how their mind's working and those type of things. So, it's pretty extraordinary. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you remember Phil Schneider?
I do remember Phil Schneider. As a matter of fact, unbeknownst to me, we were living in the same area. I was living in Southwest Portland and Tigard, and he was living in Wilsonville right below me on I-5. And I didn't know it at the time, but I found out later after he died. So, yeah.
After he was
interesting
murdered,
guy.
you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was murdered. Yeah. Well, anyway, I probably said too much. I'm sure there's other people that want to chime in. So anybody else want to ask questions for our wonderful guest today?
Tim, do you have anything? A great conversation, you guys.
Yeah. I was just wondering if you ever heard of Rebazar TARS or Universal Guides.
Universal guides, yeah. Rebazar Tar, no, I haven't. And when I say universal guides, I that came up when I was studying the Saint Germain and Ascended Masters, if I remember correctly. And I'm not sure what context you're talking about, so maybe you can explain it to me. And then my guess is probably not the same thing you're thinking of. What do you mean by universal masters?
They're called universal guides now.
Guides. I'm sorry.
Yeah, they're presenters of what I guess I'd see as a real guidance and a real education to what life's all about and why we came here to Earth. Have you ever heard of the astral plane or world or realm?
Oh yeah. See, I when I was younger, I went to a lot of psychic schools and training after I was already very psychic, because my problem was I was seeing too much and I was too empathic and I was having a lot of problems being grounded in this world. And luckily enough, I had a grandmother who was both my grandmothers were very psychic, but one was extremely psychic to the point where her and I could see through each other's eyes. That's how connected we were. She actually I think she saved me. I'm not sure she saved me or the angel saved me, but somebody saved me when I was a baby, and she was part of that whole situation. And she said it was the same angel over the crib in the hospital that saved her when she was about 12 or 13, when she was dying of rheumatic fever or whatever it was called back in the early 1900s. And so, yeah, her and I were always very, very connected. I think she was a contactee, but thought they were angels. I've always felt that. And her and my father saw a UFO one night, or they saw lights in the sky or something. They've had, different things happen to them. So, and as we all know, it's very generational.